Welcome, everybody. Hopefully, your day is going well. We get started momentarily. It's allowing the notification to go out. If you can, please share the link as I make sure that my audio is working correctly here. Thank you. Once again, welcome everybody. Hopefully your day is going well. Just allowing the notification to go out right quick, and then we'll be getting started. So appreciate your patience, everybody. If you can, please share the link. We're getting started in about 1 minute. Appreciate your patience, brothers and sisters. Give me about 30 seconds and I'll be on, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the midday talk for today. All right. Appreciate your patience, everybody. Hopefully your day is going well. If it's your first time joining over here, welcome. I'm Pastor Jay. And let me cue the music on my end. All right. Yeah, if it's your first time, once again, I'm Pastor Jay. And welcome. And today, as you guys can see, Midday Talk, the journey of Abraham and the submission of Sarai, his wife. And just want to use this time for today to go through Genesis, of course, the journey of Abraham, talk a little bit about Abraham, pull out a couple of things, and also I'm going to try to use my eSword app today. I was trying to figure out which app I was going to use, whether I was using Baba.com, since it's got the little audio reader person on there, to let it read for me. But the little player thing, the way they got it set up is weird. And so now remember I had this eSword app on my computer, so I pull that on here, and so I'm gonna attempt to use that to help aid in the reading. But other than that, hopefully y'all day is going well. Welcome anybody who's brother y'all son, what's going on? Shalom, man. Anybody else that's listening that haven't commented or that will comment later on, definitely welcome. And let me change up the banner here. But the goal is to go through the journey of Abraham and let's get as far as we can in it, and pull out some things that you may know because the apostles pointed it out to us. So to remind you guys of things the apostles said, but also pull out some other things as well that may not be in the apostles' letters, but is found in the law. And so without further ado, let me share my screen here. We're going to attempt to use this today. All right. It's my eSword app here. And I'm going to attempt to let the man read for me. And I'll just pause when I need him to pause. And help me get through this teaching for today. So definitely listen intently. Open ears and eyes. There's a section that I won't be able to skip it on the player. So we'll have to bear it. But matter of fact, I'm gonna attempt to read chapter 11 myself. I'm going to read verses 1 through 9, then I'm going to jump down to verse 27. And the only reason is it's just the rest is just the Tennessee stuff that's, you can read on your own time, but it's not pertinent to today's discussion. All right. So let's start at verse 1. Going back to the Tower of Babel. All right. It's a little backdrop for anybody that forgot or needs to know or reminded. At this point, you done had the fall of mankind. Men are now corrupt in their nature. And God has casted men out of the garden. You've had plenty generations pass since this point in time. Before this point in time, you've had many generations pass by. Now you get to Abraham, who's a Gentile, and his family that are Gentiles from the Ur Chaldees, the land in which his father's from. And now we get to the Lord calling Abraham. Now, the Lord had called other men beforehand, right? The Lord had faith, called Noah. The Lord called Enoch, Abel. He had these people called of God prior to this. But those were individual people. They were Gentiles, these men that were called by God. But now you have the significance of Abraham, because it's through Abraham that the Lord is going to bring forth an entire nation that he's going to call his, right? All prior to that, the Lord had been dealing with men that he was calling out of different nations that were Gentiles. And these men like Noah and, Job and Enoch and them, were called of God. But in terms of an entire nation of people going into covenant with God by way of blood and all that, this was going to come through Abraham. And ultimately, this was all to be a foreshadow regarding what Christ was going to do in regards to calling his people to himself through his own blood, and those being the true, eternal children of God. The children of Israel, according to the flesh, was just a foreshadow of the true children of God. And this is why all those that are under Christ's blood are truly God's people, whereas those that were under the bloods of bulls and goats are discontinued people. And unless they're brought under the blood of the covenant of Christ, it doesn't matter if they were God's people under the First Testament. They're no longer his people now, because their covenant with God was based upon discontinued blood. And so therefore their place as God's people is discontinued as well, unless they come to Christ. All right. And so at this point, God, here's Abraham. He grows up. His mother has him. He come out through his mother's womb. Wham. He grows up. He's there in the land. His natural mother apparently most likely dies at this point, prior hand to the Lord calling him out. His father Terah is still alive. And so now we have this point where God calls Abraham. But right before the Lord calls Abraham, something takes place a little bit beforehand. All right. Fulfilling what the Lord desired from the beginning, when God said, "Let us make man in our image, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the flocks of the air, and over the land animals, etc." Right, that men named. And so the Lord wanted and always had planned that his kingdom be throughout the entire earth. not in one little pocket of the earth, but the entire earth itself. All right. And so that was always the Lord's plan. The issue is that men became corrupted. And so men at first was not willingly going to go and possess the entire earth that God planned for them to rule over. All right. And so, and the reason for this is because the earth is the Lord's footstool. The entire earth is the Lord's footstool. And the kingdom of heaven, where God dwells, is full of righteousness. And the Lord wanted the earth to be full of righteousness. But righteousness is something that must be demonstrated or come through vessels. In that case, the vessels was mankind. All right. And so the angels, before they fell, they were upright, and the men on earth that were to rule the earth, they were upright, and they were supposed to spread throughout the world upright and rule the earth in righteousness. That's what's supposed to happen. The entire earth subject to God, being an extension of his throne, where righteousness dwells, whether it be the angelic forces in the heavens or whether it be the human forces on earth. And everything was to be perfect and undefiled and upright and clean and all of that. All right, but the garden takes place. Men go into slavery. Satan's their master now. Sin is in their flesh. They constantly sinning against God. God is angry, curses men to death. And so now you have men dying now. And you have sin growing in the world. And men are being stubborn, and they don't want to willingly spread throughout the world. They want to remain together and be wicked. So now you have this point where men are traveling to the east now. They all speaking the same language. They got no barriers of language like we got today. And so they come to this land that we now call Babel, and this is where this event takes place. So whether men want to do it willingly or not willingly, the Lord's will be done. Even if you do evil, he'll use your very evil to get his will accomplished. So it's not, you're not going to be able to thwart the will of God. Men thought they could thwart the will of God, right? And so God told them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, right? And go in and dwell and rule it. But men was like, no, God, no, we're going to be stubborn, and we're going to speak one language, and we're going to go together and make a name for ourselves, so we won't go and be scattered across the world. And God said, all right. So this is where Tower of Babel comes in at, all right? The whole earth, as it says, and this is post the flood, by the way, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make a name, right? Make ourselves famous, a monument, a memorial. Let's make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. All right. So we see that the whole focus or the whole objective of this great tower that they're going to build, that we still got remnants of still today on the earth. The whole point was it was in defiance of God. All right. In defiance of the Lord. And so they wanted to make a name for themselves, a memorial, something that would cause their name to be everlasting, so they won't be removed. And so they won't be scattered upon the face of the earth. And the Lord said, and the Lord came down to see the city and the tower. Now, nobody saw a little body, so how did they know God came down? This is written after the fact, and this is written through by the prophet Moses as he recounts this situation. And so through wisdom, by way of the Spirit, he knew the Lord came down, saw what they were doing, because this is written after the fact of what the Lord did in response to what men were doing. So we know that the Lord, who sees all things, came down, looked at what men were doing, and then the Lord showed his disapproval for what they were doing because of what ensued as a reaction or a response from God, all right, from the heavens. So this is how they knew that, by observing the Spirit and by wisdom understanding these things. So he says, and the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one. And what the Lord want, he want men to be one, right? I mean, Christ said that, be one as my Father in heaven is one. God want the men to be one? Yeah, but not the way they are one, not in wickedness. So he says, go. He says, behold, the people is one, and they have one language. And this they began, I'm sorry, guys. Yeah, it's one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. So as long as men had the same language and could understand each other totally, and they used the same way of speech, and they could easily communicate, and then they were one in unity, if their hearts are wicked, there's no boundaries to the wickedness they can accomplish. I mean, look at the world today, how wicked it is with boundaries. Imagine no language barriers. And you're literally one people. You're not many nationalities and all this stuff with different cultures. You share the same culture. You speak the same tongue, and all your hearts are wicked. Can you imagine the greatness of evils men could accomplish? Look how bad it is now. Wow, they got different cultures. Why they got different gods. Why they got different languages. And got to hire specialists to come in and translate and all that other stuff. And look how wicked they are. So the Lord says, the people are one, they're unified, they have one language, there's no barrier that causes them to have miscommunications in their speech and meanings of words that they use. And as a result of this one ship and no barriers, this is what they begin to do. Why? Because of the hardness of their hearts, their stubbornness. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. So the Lord said, go. Let us go down and confound their language. Now, can you imagine? And this all took place over time. This wasn't like, one day you just, two people are talking. Hey, man, how's it going? They both speaking. Of course, they didn't speak English back then, but let's just say English-speaking men. We speaking. Hey, bro, how's it going today, man? Yeah, man. Hey, you got that mortar today? Yeah, I got that mortar today and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden, in a blink of an eye, yeah, man, I got that brick, man. I'm just telling you, like it wasn't like that. This was over time. All right. This was over time of how this all took place. It's the same when you see the same working of the Lord, how that was being done over a process of time, even going into the modern eras as languages continued to conform and become more distant and meanings of things changed. And, this is why Acts 2 is such a big deal. All right. And so the point is, this doesn't happen, that very same day. This happened in a process of time here as the people were building the tower. All right. So they had no miscommunications. They were one, their hearts were hardened, and they were all wanting to make a name for themselves and not be scattered among the face of the earth. They wanted to remain together in the same land. All right. But the Lord said, no, let's go down, confound their languages so that now they won't understand what each other's saying. They're going to have miscommunications, and miscommunications leads to arguments, and arguments lead to war, and war leads to people taking people into slavery, and all that ends up scattering folks throughout the world. This is how the Lord accomplished that, spreading men throughout the world. Divide and conquer. You don't understand, you're arguing, greed, and all the other evils of the flesh that men were living in. You're not unified, so now you become enemies. You're opposition. You're rivals. You're in competition. And so you want that one gone, they want you gone, and so y'all fight, and whoever loses gets scattered or killed, and the other person takes over. And that process keeps happening over and over and over again, even to the modern times now, with war. Divide and conquers. Divide and conquers. These people scattered. These people come immigrants. These people take over. These people rule for a time. Their kingdom finally falls. Another people rule over them because they went to war with them and lost. That same thing happening over and over and over and over again. All right. This is what the apostle talked about when he said that the Lord from one man made all nations on the earth, and he appointed their boundaries and the times of their rise and falls. All right. This is how the Lord accomplished these things. So he started by confusing their languages, which caused arguments and then caused wars. Right? And so they would not understand each other's speech. So as a result of this, the Lord scattered them abroad from thence, from Babel, upon the face of all the earth. So this is a process of time that this all took place. All right. And they left off to build the city. So that's why the Tower of Babel, you can still see it in the land of, I think it's Aratat or whatever it's called. Over in the Eastern world, the tower's still there, unfinished. The Lord has left it through all these generations as a sign. All right. And so the scripture says, therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So this is how the Lord accomplished that. So the Lord, he scatters them, and these different families begin to grow because men are still having sex, and they're still having babies, and they're still bringing forth seeds into the world and clans and all of that stuff. And so people continue to multiply and multiply. The Lord's will from the beginning being done, even though men are wicked. And so men are scattering from the face of the earth. They're ruling over the fish of the sea and all of that, and they're taking over lands, and they're ruling over animals, and they got the animal mules tamed and working for them in the fields. All this stuff is going on through all this time. Generation after generation after generation is taking place. Then eventually, jump down to verse 27. It says, now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. They're brothers, right? And Haran, one of the brothers of Abraham, begat Lot. So Lot is Abraham's nephew. And Haran, Abraham's brother, died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity, in the Ur of Chaldees. So Abraham was from the Ur of Chaldees. He was a Gentile man. All right. He wasn't a Jew. He wasn't an Israelite. He wasn't any of that. All right. So, and Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abraham's wife was Sarai. And the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, his brother, so his niece. All right. So Abraham married Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife, his brother, was Milcah, who was one of the daughters of his brother Haran, who died. All right. So Abraham's brother married one of his niece. All right. The daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarah was barren. She had no child, which was a reproach to women who understood their roles. To not be able to bring forth the child was like, you know how women today, when the whole feminist movement, all this stuff, and they arguing about equal rights of men and what men can do, we could do, we want equal pay and be treated the same and all that kind of stuff, how women are so hell-bent on that, and they're so sad when they're getting paid wage, they got the whole pay wage gap thing, all that going on politically, and they're all upset about that, and they got these little protests. For real women who feared God, not being able to bring forth children into the world was a reproach to them. They didn't want that on their name. So they took pride in bringing forth seed into the world the right way, through marriage. They took pride in that. To be married, to have a husband, yet to not be able to bring forth children to the world was a reproach to them. All right. They understood that God put man and women together in marriage, and he said, be fruitful and multiply. And they wanted to do that. So to not be able to do that was a reproach to them, a stench on their name. So, but God decided to do that because God is the one who closes the womb, and he's the one who opens the womb, as is written in the scriptures. So God decided, I'm going to close Sarah's womb. Forever? No. She didn't know whether it was forever or not, because she's a human. She got to live in time. So in time, she can't get pregnant. They've tried, and we know they tried because they were husband and wife, and they realized she was barren and couldn't bring forth no children. So they've tried and tried and tried, and they're like, man, I can't bring forth no kids. So she has this reproach, this stench there. The Lord decided to withhold creating any children in her womb for a time because he was saving that child for a purpose. But they didn't know that this is way in advance before God ever gave a promise. So Sarah was barren. She had no child. And Terah, Abraham's father, took Abram and his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his son's son, so his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, And they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran and dwelt there. So Abraham's father, as it just said, took up his estate to move from Ur Chaldees to the land of Canaan. Now, we know the land of Canaan is promised land, all right? But it wasn't a promised land to Terah. Terah was just trying to go there naturally. He was only trying to go there naturally. He was just moving from Ur Chaldees to the land of Canaan for whatever his natural reason and cause was, all right? But he stopped in Haran, the land of Haran, and it was not, the Lord did not appoint for him to go to Canaan, for the Lord took his life while he was in Haran when they were settled there, all right? So Terah was trying to go there by natural means, trying to go to Canaan, all right? It was not a land promised to him or his family or anything like that. He was just going there naturally, all right? So, and the days of Terah were 205 years, man. And Terah died in Haran, all right? So let's move on. Now the Lord has said unto Abram, Terah's son, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show you. Now, we know what that land was. Abraham, in time, when the Lord appears to him and say this, Abraham don't know what land that was. That's why the apostle said in Hebrews, when Abraham got this promise, he left his family, not even knowing where he was going. He didn't even know where he was going. All right, because the Lord didn't tell him what land that was. Now, so to kind of backtrack a little bit, his father Terah was going to the land of Canaan. That's where he was going anyway. But it was by natural means he was going. The Lord takes Terah's life. Terah dies. Then the Lord comes to Abram, Terah's son, and tells Abram, get thee out of that country, that kindred, and that father's house, and go to a land I shall show you. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So Terah was going to Canaan for natural reasons, but the Lord was about to give Abraham the land of Canaan by promise. All right. Now, when God made this oath and this promise, he didn't announce what the name of the land was. All right. He didn't announce what the name of that land was. Look at what the Lord said to him. He told him all these promises, and he's going to show him the land, but he didn't tell him what the land was, like what the land name was. So Abraham, following his father, knew his father's plan was go to Canaan. God shows up to him and say, go to the land I shall show you, and all these promises. I'll bless you, and your seed after you, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed by you. Blah, 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 blah. Abraham says, amen. And he just begins the journey, not knowing where he's going. In his mind, he ain't going where his father was going to, because he knew his father was going to Canaan. But here comes God and tell him, leave your kinsmen behind, leave where y'all at in Haran, and go to a land I'll show you, and I'll bless you. So he's just walking by faith. He don't know where he's going at this point, because God done told him to leave the first journey he was on with his family, his kinsmen, to go on this journey by himself. So Abraham departed, as the Lord has spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. So he said, hey, bro, or nephew, God has spoken to me. I don't know where I'm going. He said he's going to show me the land. So I got to walk by faith, not by sight right now. I know where Dad was taking us before we stopped here in Haran and dwelt here for a couple of years. But God's telling me to get up and go. He's going to show me the land he's going to give me. Come on with me. His nephew goes, okay. All right. Because remember, his father died. Talking about Lot. Lot's father died. And so his grandfather took him with him. Then his grandfather died. So now his brother's brother, meaning Abram, is taking him with him now. All right. So he's subject to Abraham. And so they go on this journey. Abraham departs as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. He's already an old man. Well, during this time, this probably counted as middle age since they lived 200, 300 years old, right? So this is probably middle age during their time. All right, this is old for us. We count this as a full life. If he was to drop dead tomorrow, we'd be like, oh, he lived a full life. This is like middle age for them. If that, it's probably kind of like teenage years. But anyway, he's 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. All right, let us know they dwelt there for a while. Like when they stopped in Haran, they lived there for a minute. They lived there so long that over time, Abraham was able to acquire servants. So this wasn't no quick stop to Haran. All right. So when he left, he took his possessions as well as the souls that he got, the servants and stuff that he got in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan. And into the land of Canaan they came. All right. So he goes to Canaan. Oh, hold on, let me fix the camera. And into the land of Canaan they came. All right. Now this is reaccounting it after the fact. This is Moses speaking, not Abraham. This is Moses speaking after the fact. All right. In time, this land Abraham eventually comes to is what the Lord showed him. But Moses is writing this after or reaccounting this after the fact. And so it's letting us know he went to the land of Canaan. Into the land of Canaan he came. All right. But remember, Abraham in time is walking by faith. He don't know where he was going. That's why the apostle said in Hebrews, he didn't know where he was going. So Abraham passed through the land into the place of Sikkim, unto the plain of Moreh. And the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abraham and said, unto thy seed will I give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. Right? So that's why I explained that to remind you that Moses is accounting this after the fact. Because remember, Terah, his father, was already taking them to Canaan. That's where they left Ur Chaldees originally. But he stopped in Haran and lived there for a couple of years. And while living there, his father Terah died. Then the Lord tells him, leave your country and your kindred, meaning your family, your people, and thy father's house, all right, there in Haran, and go unto a land I will show you. This is why the apostle said he didn't know where he was going. All right. And so Moses lets us know Abraham came into Canaan in verse 5. Into Canaan he came, but then Moses tells us how Abraham knew Canaan was the land God was showing him when he says, and the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, unto thy seed will I give this land. That's when Abraham understood that was the land that God was promising to his seed. Prior to that, he didn't know. It was only until the Lord appeared to him and told him that. All right. So I will give this land, and there he built an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. And he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent. Now, remember what the apostle said. He said, when Abraham got into the land, he lived as a foreigner and a sojourner, for he did not build himself a city. He dwelt in tents. This is what the apostle is explaining here. All right. This is a matter of reading, studying, meditating, and the Holy Spirit revealing that, because you know how people make the Bible is saying in that verbatim little excuse thing. It's not silent. The apostle understood this by the Spirit and meditation of what he read in the law, what the law was saying, what it was teaching. All right. But there was no verbatim passage that said what he said in the New Testament, where he said Abraham, when he got in the land, he lived as a foreigner and sojourner, for he did not build himself a city. Instead, he dwelt in tents. He looked for a better city, a permanent place, not made by men's hands. Like when the apostle talked like that, there's no scripture in the Old Testament that says that. How did he know that? How did he know that's what the law was saying? It's because of the Holy Spirit, not through hermeneutics, not through exegesis, eisegesis. It wasn't through that. So by reading this, you see the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, this is the land I will get to thy seed. And when the Lord tell Abraham that, Abraham didn't stop and build a city. When the Lord told him that, oh, this is the land. Let's land ho and build up a city. He didn't do that. Instead, he left the place where God said, I've given it to you and your seed. He left there and moved to another place and stayed in a tent again. Like, what does Abraham look? Why is he still moving around in tents when God told him, this is the land right here that I'm giving you? Abraham's like, okay, I'm moving on. Like, what? What is Abraham thinking here? He's thinking about something the law is teaching us, that God said, this is the land, yet Abraham doesn't stop his journey. Neither does he stop and build a permanent place to live. He continues to move around in the land like a foreigner, like a person just passing through, living in tents. And that's why the apostle said what he said. The Holy Spirit called him to understand that. So he said, he removed into a mountain on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Hai on the east. And there he built an altar unto the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abraham journeyed, going on still toward the south. Like, Abraham ain't standing still. Bro, Abraham's still going. What is he looking for? And there was a famine. Uh-oh. So now he's in the land of Canaan. The Canaanites are there, those idolaters and sexually immoral and all super wicked people. God is angry with them. So God sends a famine. Abraham, the righteous person, is in the land. And though God didn't send a famine to destroy Abraham, yet Abraham was affected. He was afflicted. He was suffering by this famine God sent into the land. So when God sends the famine and it causes a shortage of food and the crops, Abraham gets up and goes down into Egypt to live in Egypt. For the famine was grievous in the land. And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, he said unto Sarai his wife, behold now, I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore, it shall come to pass when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, this is his wife. We'll get into that in a second. And they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Now, let's think about this. Abraham's going into this land of the Egyptians. He looks at Sarai. He says, I know you're a beautiful woman to look upon. All right. So the question is going to be, when he made this statement, was he talking about her outer beauty or her inner beauty? Which one was he talking about? Outer beauty. She was just so beautiful outwardly that as soon as the men see her, they were like, wow, let's kill him. No, look at what Abraham said. He said, I know thou art a fair woman to look upon. But then he says, therefore it shall come to pass when the Egyptians shall see you, they shall say among themselves, this is his wife. What? I don't care how beautiful a woman is. You won't be able to identify her husband based off her outer looks. Right, Brother Fonzo. It was from the inner beauty that the Egyptians saw. That is through the inner beauty of Sarah that they were able to identify who her husband was because of her submission and her closeness to him. Not because she's beautiful on the outside. There's nothing about her outer beauty that tells you who you married to. If my wife walked into a store right now and I walked in with a whole bunch of other people, because remember, Abraham's going into this land with a whole mass of people and crops and animals. It was just him and Sarah walking in holding hands. Oh, that must be his wife, man. That must be his wife. He had a whole bunch of things with him. Yet, by them simply looking at her and observing her, they can find out who her husband is when they see her. It's just like with your children. I don't care how your children look. I won't know who their parents is until the parents come around in the vicinity, and then you see the child's attention turn, and they run to him and say, "Daddy, mommy." Then you be like, "Oh, that's his mom and that's his daddy." Same thing with a wife. You won't know based off looking at her outer skin and beauty with earrings or whatever who her husband is. But when you see all these other men come around, you had Lot, you had Abram, you had all these other men and slaves that they didn't had coming from Haran, and yet you see her in total submission to this one particular dude. You know that's her husband. You know that's her husband. So they see her. Abraham said, when they see you and they look upon you, they should say to themselves, that's his wife. And they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee. He's, human fear is coming over Abraham right now. He's still a human. He's called by God, but he's still a human. And so human fear and weakness of his flesh came upon him. And so he says, say, I pray thee, that you are my sister, that it will be well with me for thy sake, that I'll be left alive for your sake. They won't kill me if they think I'm your brother. If you just tell them I'm your brother, if you tell them I'm your husband, they're going to kill me. Why is this? Because remember, he said, I know you're beautiful to look upon. And when they see you, they'll say to themselves, that's his wife. But then he says, but tell them, you're my sister. And they'll leave me alive for thy sake. Why do you say that? Because in the law of God, even though there wasn't the law of Moses at this time, but in that culture and in the law of God, you had the women that were submissive to their husbands. Women were submissive to their husbands, their fathers, and their brothers. Their husbands, their fathers, their husbands, their brothers. You see this even in David's house. All right. So you had the women, the wives would call their husbands Lord, and the sisters would call their brothers Lord. All right. So they were submissive totally because they were subject to man, but you saw this total submissiveness between wives to their husbands and sisters to their brothers. All right. So when they look at her and see her total submission, their first reaction is going to be, that's her husband. But Abraham said, no, tell him I'm your brother. All right. And so that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. And it came to pass that when Abraham was coming to Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman that she was very fair, very beautiful to look upon. But this ain't talking about outward beauty. This is talking about inward beauty. For the apostle said so. He said, this is how the women of old made themselves beautiful, by the good works that they did. A meek and quiet spirit, submissiveness. Submit to her husband all things. To say Sarah was so submissive, she called her husband Lord, meaning master. You catch hell today trying to get women to do that. I ain't your slave. I don't need a man. So it came to pass when Abraham was coming to Abraham came into Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman that she was very fair. The princess also of Pharaoh saw her and commended her before Pharaoh. So you're talking about princes. All right. I gotta reference this wicked movie since we've seen it, but I want to use that as a reference. Coming to America, the first one. And that scene where all those princes was coming around to the wedding or whatever, the little ceremony or whatever case is for the father to pick his wife or whatever. And you had all these options. You had all these outwardly beautiful women lined up. Then you had this other woman who was fair to look at outwardly, but she was totally submissive to him, even to the point of he asked, what you like? Whatever you like. Whatever I like, huh? And he sat there and stared at her, and he wanted to test her submissiveness. So then he said, jump on one leg. She ain't asked. She just started doing it. Bark like a dog. Right? It's supposed to be funny in the movie, but what she was demonstrating was total submissiveness to her husband. Right? Which is an honorable thing. Of course, we wouldn't tell her to bark like a dog and stuff like that, but that's the point of what he was doing. He was testing her submissiveness. All right? And so, but he didn't want that in the movie. Wicked guy. He said he wanted to go to America, to McDonald's, or whatever the place was called, to that other girl. They had the smart mouth and unsubmissive and all that other stuff. So, but Sarah was fair to look upon. She was so submissive and such a meek and quiet spirit and submissive soul that the princes in the palace took notice of her. And said, man, she'll make a good wife for you, Pharaoh. The pharaohs didn't want no unsubmissive, haughty women up in the castle. The princes also of Pharaoh saw her and commended her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And he entreated Abram well for her sake. Oh, man. Hey, man, I'm going to take her as my wife. That's her brother? Bring him in. This is my brother-in-law, everybody. Abraham standing there like, yeah, man, brother-in-law. It's my brother-in-law now, guys. Give him cattle. Give him flocks. Give him land. Give him servants. Pharaoh's blessing Abraham, boy. He had sheep, oxen, and donkeys, and men servants, and maid servants, and she donkeys, and animals. And the Lord plagued Pharaoh. Man, this is why the scripture said the Lord's judgments are unfathomable. Abraham uses the truth cunningly, so now it's a lie. So don't tell him I'm your husband. Say I'm your brother. So that I can remain alive for your sake. Pharaoh seen her, takes her in as his wife. Come on in, brother, my new brother-in-law, man. Give him the fatted calf, give him them sheep, give him them donkeys, give him the male and the female donkeys so they could procreate, and give him more donkeys, give him the camels so he could travel around and all that kind of stuff and drink the milk. Give him all of this, man, my brother-in-law, man. What is mine is yours, bro. Thank you, brother. And the Lord sitting there. Remember, the Lord promised, by promise, he said, I'll bless those who bless you and I'll curse those who curse you. Abraham got both. He got blessed and cursed because he blessed Abraham and did evil to Abraham. How did he do evil to Abraham? About to find out. So he gives Abraham all these gifts. Abraham already had a bunch of flock already from his father's estate when his father died. And he already had servants already when he left Haran. But now he got way more now. He's super rich. But then the Lord plagued Pharaoh. The Lord's angry. He plagues him. And his house with great plagues because of Sarah, Abram's wife. How do we know that? How do we know those plagues, or how did they find out those plagues was because of Sarah? How do they know? Remember, Moses is telling us after the fact, but in time, how those people at that time figured this out? How do they know? Everything was fine. Because remember, Abraham only went into Egypt because there was a famine in Canaan, and Egypt was fine. It was flourishing. God was blessing it. All right? And everything was fine until this guy and that woman came up in this castle. Now all of a sudden, everything's plagued. And it's just my house plague. It ain't affecting nobody else. It's just me and my house. And the only thing that changed up recently was you came and you came. That's the only thing that happened. And so Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me she was thy wife? So in that space of time, Pharaoh came into some knowledge, somewhere the truth came out, and he understood they were not just brothers and sisters. They're more than that. They're more than that. Because everything was fine here until y'all two showed up. And when you showed up, everything got plagued around here. Now we got these plagues. What you done to me? Why you didn't tell me she was your wife? And Pharaoh called, why says thou she's my sister? So I might have taken her to be my wife. The Pharaoh understood taking another man's wife was evil. And that the gods, even though they didn't believe in the one true God, the gods will be against you. They had multiple gods, so-called. But they understood that much at least. Why did you say she's my sister? So that I might take her to be my wife. Now, therefore, behold, thy wife, she your wife, take her back and leave here. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, meaning his army men, commanded his men concerning Abraham, and they sent him away. They escorted Abraham out the land and his wife and everything he had. He said, you get out of here, Abraham. Take your wife, take your nephew, take all that stuff I gave you and the stuff you came here with. Leave here, man, so the plagues can leave me. What is it you done to me? So we see what made Sarah beautiful in the eyesight of the Pharaoh and the Egyptians, that all the princes took notice of her and recommended her to Pharaoh. And he took her to be one of his wives because of how beautiful she was. And it had nothing to do with outer beauty. It had to do with that inner beauty, a meek and quiet servitude spirit. She wasn't haughty, talking back, and all this other stuff. All right. And Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife and all he had, and Lot with him into the south. Now, Abram was very rich in cattle and silver and gold, clearly at this point. And he went on his journeys from the south even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at in the beginning, between Bethel and Hai, unto the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. So see how the Lord got him moving around? So Abraham first gets into the land. God tells him, this the land I've given to you and your descendants. Abraham hears it. Abraham believes it. And then Abraham moves on and dwell in tents, moving around in the land. He ain't stopped. He ain't built no city. And then remember, the Canaanites, the evildoers, were in the land as well at the same time. And so God was dishing out his anger towards their sins and brought a famine on the land that then forced Abraham to go into Egypt. All right? To go into Egypt. And while there, the Lord blesses Abraham abundantly, getting way more possessions. Now, Abraham's super rich. Now, watch how all this is setting up. Because remember, Abraham and Lot had a state already. They had cattle already, etc. And Abraham had servants already before they went into Egypt. Now, as a result of Egypt, their riches have multiplied, but they're still together. Now their numbers have grown exponentially to where they're not going to be able to continue to dwell together. This is how the Lord set that up. And the Lord made them rich by sending them into Egypt for a small time and used the heathen's riches to bless Abraham, the called one. Then after the Lord was done there, the Lord forces Abraham out of Egypt through Pharaoh to go back where his journey began at that tent and that altar he built before. And it says, and Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. And the land was not able to bear them. It was able to bear them at first when they were first there together, but now it can't no more because how the Lord blessed them in Egypt. Now the land cannot bear them no more, meaning they got too much cattle, so they're going to eat through the grass and stuff way faster than the seasons that come that cause the things to grow back. So it wouldn't be wise for them to stay together. They need to spread out. So see how the Lord is using all these natural occurrences and issues to get his will done, all right? And men can't thwart it, all right? And so, and the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. They're arguing because, hey, you got to feed the animals, and this land is already small with all our cattle, and now it's making it difficult for us to feed all these animals. So some of these animals are starting to get sick. They're starting to shrivel up. They're starting to die. They're getting now malnourished because not enough land for the amount of animals that need to eat it. All right? So now they're getting angry with each other. All your animals eat. No, all your animals, man. You need to make space, bro. Now you need to make space. And they start to argue. Because not only their big land, their big amount of possessions there, but you still had the regular people of the land already there, like the Canaanites, as it says. The Canaanites and the Perizzites dwelled with them in the land. And Abram said to Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and your herdmen. For we are brethren, we're close relatives, we're neighbors. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate yourself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. And if thou depart from the right, then I will go to the left. Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld the whole plain, all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. All right, now we're getting another setup, a little backstory now. So the Lord blesses Abram and Lot to where they can't physically dwell together no more. And the land that once could house them can't house them no more. So now they must separate if anybody's going to survive. And if you're going to make peace between their estates, because the herdsmen were at war now. Abraham said, if you take the left, I'll go right. If you take the right, I'll go left, bro. He said, you choose, Lot. Lot looks up his eyes. He looks all around the land. He sees in the plains of Jordan, man, it's well watered over there. My flocks will surely flourish over there. And that land they looked at was the area of Sodom and Gomorrah before God destroyed it. So before God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and it looked the way it looked now, it was beautiful. Matter of fact, it was so beautiful, it was compared to the garden of God. That's how beautiful Sodom and Gomorrah, that land was at one point. It was like the garden of God, as it's written. Even though before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of God, like the land of Egypt, flourish, blessed, milk and honey. That's how it looked before. Remember that backdrop. Then Lot chose all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves from one from the other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. And Sodom and Gomorrah is like, all America's wicked, right? But then you got Las Vegas. That's how it was. All the nations are wicked. The Egyptians were wicked too. They were idolaters. But compared to those people in Sodom, Sodom was like Las Vegas, the sin city, where sin just amounted exceedingly, especially in that portion of the land. That's how it was. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners of the Lord exceedingly, meaning greatly. They were such great sinners, they sinned against nature itself by being homosexuals. And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot was separated from him, God told him, lift up your eyes and look from the place where thou art northward and southward and eastward and westward. Abraham looks up, he looks around. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then thy seed should also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give it to thee. Then Abraham removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built an altar unto the Lord. So we see this journey of Abraham. God told him a long time ago, this is the land I'm giving you. Abraham's like, he believed it, and then he kept on moving, living in tents. He ain't built no city. And even when the Lord tell him, look, eastward, westward, northward, southward, I'm giving this to you and your seed. Yet Abraham himself never makes a city in any of those lands. He lives in tents as he moved around. What is Abraham looking towards? Apostles told us what he was looking towards. Even though you won't verbatimly read it through hermeneutics, the context king won't tell you. I just have to say that because a lot of people keep doing that. It kind of gets on my nerves. Context is king. No, clearly not. Because nothing in the context is going to tell you what the apostle said. Hermeneutic reading, verse. Let the Bible define itself. It ain't, my boy. Anyway, those are modern day men things. That's not how the apostles operated. Things they said you'll never find verbatimly. You'll never understand it through hermeneutics. You only understand it through the Spirit of God. So he removes his tent, came down to the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built the altar there. So he's moving around. He continued to worship the Lord. As he's moving through this land that the Lord promised him and his descendants. And it came to pass in the days of, I'm going to let the man read for me right quick. Take me a little break from reading.
Chapter 14. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar.
Can y'all hear that man? Can you hear that man reading? Let me see. Let's make sure. Let me make sure y'all can hear the man.
Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasa, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of...
Okay, cool. All right. All right, man, let's go ahead.
Nations, that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeba, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. All these were joined together in the vale of Siddim, which is the salt sea. 12 years they served Kedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. And in the 14th year came Kedorlaomer, and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims in Ashtaroth-Karnaim, and the Zuzims in Ham, and the Emims in Sheva-Kiriathaim, and the Horites in their Mount Seir, unto El Paran, which is by the wilderness. And they returned and came to En-Mishpat, which is Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazazon Tamar. And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same as Zoar, and they joined battle with them in the vale of Siddim, with Kedorlaomer the king of Elam, and with Tidal king of nations, and Amraphel king of Shinar, and Arioch king of Elasa, 4 kings with 5. And the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountain. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all their victuals, and went their way.
So you see how the Sodom and Gomorrah kingdom was super wicked. The Lord stirs up the hearts of the kings, and they begin this long, 12-year-long battle. Well, they began this war, and some of the nations became slaves of this king. Then he rebelled, and another war ensued that drew out Sodom and Gomorrah. But then when they went out and fought in this war, they lost, the Lord brought judgment on that wicked kingdom of Sodom and Gomorrah and had all their victuals and their things taken from them. You see how the judgment of God came upon these nations and upon Sodom and Gomorrah, that super wicked place, right?
And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. And there came one that had escaped, and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and brother of Anah, and these were confederate with Abram. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants by night, and smote them, and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people.
All right. I think I'm going to save this one for another midday talk this week, because I want to keep going through Abraham's journey. But I don't want to move on to Melchizedek yet. So what we see here, you see the setup for all these things, because the Lord's going to give all these promises, and obviously everything's going to lead up to Joseph at some point. But right now, we see a couple things that the apostles pointed out, and a couple things that the Lord by the Spirit has allowed me to point out that you might have not read or heard through the apostles' writing when we look at the story of Abraham. And we see that his father Terah left from Ur-Chaldees to go to Canaan on his own accord. It wasn't by promise. They was trying to go there. God did not promise that land to Terah. So the Lord has Terah and them stop in Haran. And while living there, the Lord takes Terah's life and then calls Abraham out from among his people, where were Gentiles, and tells him to go into a land he will show him. Abraham didn't know what land that was until he eventually got there, and then the Lord appeared to him again and told him that's the land. So that's when Abraham knew the land of Canaan was the promised land that God was promising him and his seed. All right. He did not know that beforehand. Moses is narrating the story. So he mentions Abraham came into the land of Canaan. It's the land of Canaan he came. But remember, in time, Abraham, when he entered Canaan, of course, he knew the land name was called Canaan when he was traveling, but he didn't know that was the land God was promising him. This is why the apostle said he didn't know where he was going. And so we see he dwells in Canaan. He has the estate of his father that he received by nature. All right, but when his father died, he received those inheritance. And so he has servants that he got in Haran already, etc. And they dwelt among the Canaanites who were wicked. Then the Lord sends a famine. All right, he holds back the waters of heaven, causes the earth to be as dust and the sky to be as iron, and brought down the plague of famine and drought and pestilence. The animals are dying off. The crops ain't growing. There's no late and early rains. And so it's forcing people out of the land. Some people are dying from starvation, while God allowed Abraham to escape by moving out of the land to go into Egypt that was flourishing. But when he got there, fear came over Abraham because he knew how beautiful his wife was to look upon, her submissiveness and quiet spirit, that it would draw the attention of the men of Egypt. All right. And so he said, tell them I'm your brother so they leave me alive. Don't tell them I'm your husband. They'll kill me. Sarah listens to her husband to spare his life and show mercy and spare his life so that the heathens won't kill him and leave him alive for her sake. So they take her in the house. And when everything was going good, things turned bad for Pharaoh in his house. And it was only to their house. So he knew it was a plague upon them and them alone. And when he starts to try to figure out what in the world was going on, the scriptures didn't go into detail of whether or not they called forth their sorcerers and people like that to do their little things to try to figure out who it was. But by observing what was going on, and by reason, and maybe a little bit of their little, magician-y people, he realizes everything was fine until y'all got here. Once y'all got here, we got plagued. What is this you've done to me? Take this woman. She's your wife. That's why she was so submissive to you. Not because she's your sister submissive, but because she's your wife submissive. Get out of here, man. And they sent him out. And Abraham goes back to where his journey began at. But because the Lord blessed him so mightily in Egypt, now the land can't hold him and Lot no more. That it once did. Now it forces them to have to separate. Abraham goes towards Sodom, that super wicked sin city, Las Vegas. He goes there. Abraham stays in Canaan. And the Lord tells Abraham, see all this? Eastward, westward, northward, southward. I'm going to give it to you and thy seed. And I'm going to grow your seed so big, there'll be as numerous as stars. Now think about this. Abraham and Lot had originally dwelt in that land of Canaan together with their herdsmen and all that. And the land could bear them. But when they come back from Egypt, where they got more possessions, now the land can't house them. They got to separate. The amount of people that Abraham had and the amount of people Lot had was nowhere near the size that God told Abraham his seed would be by promise, meaning as numerous as the dust of the sand of the sea, a number that can't be counted. This is how we know that when it comes to the true people of God, this is not just talking about the children of Israel, the nation itself, because they had registries. They had numbers when they left Egypt that could be counted. They had 600,000, as it says, including women and children. And over time, they had more people, but they had more registries. And they kept tabs because why? On the 8th day, they would circumcise their kids. All right? They had registries. Eventually, children of Israel gets very, very large. Matter of fact, in the scripture refers to them as the number of the sea, meaning a very large number. That's what that means. All right. But that was his seed by sex, through nature. Not by promise, but by nature. When the Lord gave this promise about his seed being as numerous as stars, that was something told Abraham by promise. Abraham didn't have so many natural kids that it was as the sand of the sea, because the natural kids don't fulfill the promise. As it's written, thy seed shall be counted through Isaac. So in order for it to count as Abraham's seed, it must be through promise. And if it's through promise, then it must be through faith. And if it's by faith, that means his countless numbers of children is coming by those who believe, not by those who come out of his loins. This is what the apostle said when he says in Romans 9. For they're not all Israel that are of Israel. Neither because they're the seed of Abraham are they all his children. But as is written, in thy seed, your seed shall be counted through Isaac. So the Lord makes his promise. Lot goes away, pitches his tent towards Sodom and Gomorrah. That was once a beautiful place compared to the garden of God itself and the land of Egypt. Very flourishing, greeny place. But it was wicked. Very wicked. Remember, the apostle said in the New Testament, said, Sodom and Gomorrah, God used Sodom and Gomorrah as an illustration of what's going to happen to the ungodly on the last day. So now think about that. The place of Sodom and Gomorrah is like the garden of God. Flourishing land, beautiful. Flourishing like Egypt. And that ain't the only time God struck the land of Canaan with a plague, a famine, but left Egypt intact. Egypt is flourishing. He did it through the time of Joseph's family. Why the Lord kept doing that? Kept striking the land of Canaan and then have his people flee into Egypt that was flourishing. Then why? But he didn't have it for them to stay in Egypt forever. Because then, every time the Lord did this, every time he sent a famine to drive his people into Egypt that was flourishing and that was beautiful, that they could live at for a while, he then brought plagues on Egypt that then brought them out. So it was not for them to stay in Egypt forever. The Lord does all these things by his wisdom, but this is what the Lord did in the heavenly realm. Kingdom of God, flourishing, beautiful place. God makes children of flesh and blood and put them in the garden. Place is flourishing. It's awesome. It's great. But the serpent is there in the land, the Canaanite. He's in the land. Super wicked. He deceives Eve, and then Adam follows the voice of his wife, commits sin. God drives him out of the garden into the world, into the rest of the earth for a time, subject to Pharaoh and them, sends them into Egypt for a little bit, subject to Pharaoh, the Satan and his angels. But it ain't for them to remain under Pharaoh's control and in Pharaoh's land and being fed by Pharaoh forever. Because by his grace, he judges Pharaoh, brings plagues. Once he did it through Moses, and then he did it through Christ. Brought plagues on Pharaoh. Moses brought plagues on literal Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Christ brought plagues on the spiritual Pharaoh, the evil one. When he judged them, destroyed his works, destroyed his kingdom, and released his people from out of his land. And took them out of Egypt through the wilderness where we are now, leading us into the promised land, the New Jerusalem. And when we left Egypt, we left with much gifts and much possessions and much wealth because the Lord blessed us when he brought us out. So the Lord, through famine, turning the land against us, the garden of God, drives us out, forces us into Egypt, where we're under Pharaoh's control for a little bit. Then he brings plagues, bring us out, and lead us into the land he promised our forefathers. The Lord has done this multiple times. He's the same today, yesterday, and forever. He's been doing the same thing since the beginning. Using different generations, different people, different circumstances, but the same thing over and over and over again. Same judgments of God, famine, pestilence. How long them plagues been coming on the earth? It's coming so long. It's been happening over and over so often that men at this point exit God out the way and say it's a mother nature. Well, just mother nature. But the Lord sends down those same judgments for the same reasons, because of sin. And he uses it, as the scripture says in Job, when the Lord sends these things, he does it for two reasons: to judge the wicked and to show mercy on some. So he judged some through the famine, and then it caused Abraham to have to go into Egypt, but the Lord blessed them while there. Then the Lord plagued Egypt, brought Abraham out with great abundance through the same event, through the same plagues. Same thing with the children of Israel. Plagued Egypt, but brought Israel out through those plagues by the hand of Moses. The same thing. We were first dead in sin, but while we were dead, Christ died for us while we were yet enemies. And through death, through Christ's death specifically, we live. Through the same event. And the Lord's been telling this story since the beginning of what was coming. But in time, as people are living this out, we're reading it after the events took place. But for the real people that were alive during this time, for Abraham and them, they didn't know all of this. They had to walk by faith. So The Lord shows us this as we look back through these stories of old. We see how Sarah was with her husband. That's why it's an evil thing. It's against nature when a woman's not submissive to her husband. That's a sin against nature. For you come out of the man's loins. It's like children who refuse to obey their parents. This is why they died in the law. It's a sin. It's such a grievous thing. Before they came out of, meaning children, you came out of their womb, your mother's womb, out of your father's loins. By nature, they're your authorities. But when you try to subvert that, you're setting nature upside down against itself. The order of God against itself. This ain't the same as lie. I lied. Yeah, that's evil, but I lied. When you have a child not be submissive, we have a wife not be submissive, or you have a man not submissive to God. These are sins against nature itself, because man comes from God. God formed him, put his spirit in him, gave him the breath of life. So it is an evil thing by nature to be an idolater. But there's only one God that made you, and he's the only one that's to be worshipped. When you worship other gods, you're setting the order upside down against itself. When you love Bastet and Thor and you're fans of that, you're committing sins that disrupt the order of God of creation. For God is the head of Christ, and Christ is the head of man. And man is the head of woman. And children are subject to their parents. Their father being the head parent, the one with the most authority over the children. That's why it's so evil. So evil in this world when men and women have kids, and then the woman takes the kid, and then they give her the ultimate authority over the kids. That's evil. It happens, but it's evil. For by nature, the man is the head authority. And no judge, no heathen judge, got the right to disrupt that order. But it happens. But the point is that, so when you're an idolater, when you don't submit to God, when you don't serve God only, it's a sin against nature itself, the natural order of things. For men naturally come from God. So by nature, you must serve God. Men are naturally men. So if you want to be a woman, it's a sin against nature. Same thing for women. Homosexuality, transgenderism are sins against nature itself. Unsubmissive wives are sins against nature itself. Unsubmissive children are sins against nature itself. But Sarah was beautiful. Sarah was submissive, even to the point of calling her husband Lord. And Apostle Paul said, you women, you're her daughters. If you follow her same footsteps and walk in love and charity and submit to your husbands, not being afraid of what your husbands might do. And so we see how the Lord is setting all of this up. We see how he's working this. And we're reading it, and it's some short paragraphs, or chapters or whatever the case is. But you're talking about 30, 40, 50 years passing by. Sometimes 50 years pass between two verses. But we see how the Lord being patient, for he's not pressed on time. Where he dwells, there is no time. And so we see the Lord setting all this up and allowing the story to be written for our learning as we recount what happened. So we can see the works of God. We see his patience described. We see the men of old and their faith in God. We see the mistakes that some of them made. So we see their mortalness, and we see that remnant of sin that had yet been fully put away. And it continues to tell us this story through different events, leading us up to Christ, who finally puts an end to sin's control over man. And so I wanted to read this and begin this journey on Abraham's life, and eventually it's going to lead from Abraham, but we're going to just keep going on. But I don't want to go into Melchizedek today. I don't want to move on that far yet. So I want to get on here and go through these chapters and read them with you guys and point out some things you might have not seen. There's always a lot more to draw out with time through these, these stories. But the wisdom that the Lord has allowed to go forth today, remember those things as we continue to move through Abraham's life and journey. Other than that, Lord's will, we'll continue from here. Lord's will, Wednesday night class, 7:30 p.m. Central Time, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So Wednesday night, Lord's will, we'll begin at Genesis 14 and 17 and go on. So other than that, I love you, brothers and sisters. Want to get on here and talk with you guys and read a little bit and Lord's will, the Lord give you guys strength as you sustain through the day. And if you got any question, the email's at the bottom, TheChurchInTexas@gmail.com. Lord's will, we respond back very soon. But other than that, love you, brothers and sisters. Continue in the faith. Continue to walk upright, fearing God, turn away from evil, and work hard to prove that you're really among those whom God has chosen. All right. Love y'all. Peace.